The dust of Clearwater, Wyoming, had a taste. It was a fine, gritty powder of alkali soil and sun-baked horse manure that coated a man's tongue and settled in the back of his throat. For 3 weeks, it had been the only flavor Eli Marsh knew, a constant reminder of his failure. He stood with his shoulder leaned against a support post of the trading post's covered porch, watching the heat shimmer off the hard-packed dirt of the main road. His hat was pulled low, casting his face in shadow, but the expression was one he had worn for 21 days straight, a quiet, bone-deep exhaustion mixed with a stubborn refusal to break. Beside him, tied to the hitching rail, stood the cause of his predicament. Ranger, a copper chestnut gelding with a coat that gleamed like a newly minted penny even under a film of dust. He was his father's horse, the last living piece of the man, and he was as proud and difficult as a thunderstorm rolling in over the plains. Eli's father had understood the horse. He had bred him, gentled him with a quiet patience that was his alone. But his father was gone 6 months now, claimed by a fever that had swept through their small valley, and all that was left was 40 acres of good bottom land and a banknote that was coming due with the unforgiving certainty of winter. The horse was the only asset of value they had. He was worth $150, maybe more to the right buyer. $150 was enough to satisfy the bank in Cheyenne and keep the land that his father had poured 30 years of his life into. But Ranger would not tolerate the right buyer, or any buyer at all. Eli had watched a dozen men try. Serious men, horsemen with calloused hands and knowing eyes. They would approach, speaking in low, soothing tones. Ranger would stand stock still, a statue of equine perfection, until a hand reached for his bridle or his neck. Then the illusion would shatter. Ears would flatten, a white rim would show around a dark eye, and a deep, guttural sound would rumble in his chest. No one had been bitten or kicked, not yet, but the warning was as clear as a gunshot in a quiet church. They always walked away, shaking their heads. "He's a one-man horse, son," a rancher from down near the Medicine Bow River had told him just yesterday, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "And his one man is in the ground." Eli knew it was true. He could handle Ranger mostly. He could groom him and feed him and lead him, but the bond, the deep and silent understanding his father had shared with the animal, was not there. For Eli, the horse was a duty. For his father, he had been a friend. Mr. Abernathy, the proprietor of the trading post, came out and stood beside him for a moment, wiping his hands on his apron. He was a kind man, with a fringe of white hair and a face creased with the worry of his customers. "No luck today, Eli?" "No, sir," Eli said, his voice a low rasp. "Same as yesterday. You can't stay here forever. That horse is eating my oats, and you're looking thinner than a fence post." Abernathy's tone was gruff but not unkind. He looked from Eli's worn boots to his frayed cuffs. "The town looks out for its own. But you're a proud boy, too much like your father for your own good sometimes." Eli just nodded. He could not accept charity. Not for this. This was a matter of honor, of preserving his father's legacy. The 40 acres was more than dirt and grass. It was a testament to a life lived with integrity and hard work. Losing it would be like burying his father all over again. He pushed himself off the post, his joints aching from another night spent in the trading post storeroom on a pile of burlap sacks. He was 26, but he felt older. The weight of the land was a physical presence on his shoulders. He ran a hand down Ranger's neck, and the horse nickered softly, nudging his palm. A flicker of affection, a ghost of the animal his father had known. That was when he heard it. A sound that did not belong in Clearwater. Not the familiar clop of a farm wagon or the jingle of a lone rider's tack, but the smooth, rhythmic beat of a matched pair of horses and the whisper of well-sprung wheels on the dusty road. A carriage was approaching. It was not a buckboard or a simple buggy, but a proper town carriage, black and polished, drawn by two handsome bays whose coats shone with grooming. It was the kind of vehicle one might see in Cheyenne, outside the governor's mansion or the cattleman's club, not pulled up to a dusty trading post that smelled of cured leather and bulk coffee. The carriage slowed and stopped directly in front of them. The driver, a man in a clean duster, remained on his seat. The door opened. A woman stepped out. She was not young, perhaps in her late 30s, with strands of silver already woven into the dark hair pinned neatly at the back of her head. She wore a traveling dress of deep blue, simple and practical, but made of a fabric that spoke of money. It was dusty from the road, but it could not hide its quality. Her face was handsome rather than pretty, with intelligent eyes and a mouth that looked like it knew how to give orders and see them followed. She moved with a purpose that Eli had seen in men who ran large ranches, a kind of settled authority that needed no announcement. She did not look at Eli. Her gaze went straight to the horse. Ranger, who had tensed at the carriage's approach, stood perfectly still. His ears were forward, curious. The woman walked directly toward him. She did not hesitate. She did not speak in a placating whisper. She simply approached as if she had every right in the world to be there, as if the horse were already hers. She lifted a gloved hand, gents placed it, palm flat, on the space between Ranger's eyes, then stroked down the length of his nose. Eli held his breath, ready to grab the lead rope. "Mister." Abernathy took a half-step forward. Ranger did nothing. He stood as if rooted to the earth, his head slightly lowered, his eyes soft. He let out a quiet sigh, a puff of warm air against her glove. For the first time in 3 weeks, in the presence of a stranger, the horse was utterly calm. The woman kept her hand on his nose for a long moment, a silent conversation passing between them. Then she turned her eyes to Eli. They were a clear, assessing gray. "He's for sale," she stated. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am," Eli managed to say. His throat was dry. "What are you asking?" $150. The words felt small in the air between them. She gave a slight nod, her eyes still on him. "I'll give you 300. Eli stared. He must have misheard. $300 was a fortune. It was the note paid twice over. It was seed for the spring, a new plow, a buffer against whatever hardship came next. It was salvation. "Ma'am?" 300, she repeated, her voice even. "But my offer comes with a condition." She looked from Eli back to the horse, then her gaze swept past him, over the dusty town, as if seeing something much larger in the distance. "A horse this particular needs a familiar hand. I need a man who understands him." She looked directly at Eli again, and a small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of her mouth. "You're here for the horse, I take it." Eli swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." "Actually," she said, her voice dropping a little, becoming more personal, "I came for the cowboy, too." The statement hung in the air. It was so direct, so unexpected, that Eli had no response. She clarified, seeing his confusion. "My name is Josephine Whitmore. I own the Whitmore Ranch, north of here. It's a large operation, 5,000 acres, and I need hands, especially one who knows how to manage a difficult animal. The 300 is for the horse. I'll also offer you a month's work at full wages. By then, the horse will be settled, and you'll have your pay on top of the sale. And my note on the bank will be paid." She had somehow understood his entire situation without him saying a word. Eli looked at Ranger, who was still resting his head near her hand. He looked at Mr. Abernathy, whose mouth was slightly agape. He looked back at this impossible woman who had appeared out of the dust like a mirage. He had come here to sell his father's horse to save his father's land. He had expected to walk home with money in his pocket, leading nothing but his own shadow. Instead, he was being offered a reprieve, a continuation of his duty to the animal, and more money than he had dared to hope for. There was no choice to make. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice steadier now. "I'll take the job." He expected a month's work. He expected to hand Ranger over and return to his own small piece of the world. He had no idea that in accepting her offer, he was not just selling a horse, but setting a course for a life he could not have begun to imagine. The transaction was complete, but the true bargain had only just been made. The journey to the Whitmore ranch took the rest of the day. Eli rode Ranger alongside the carriage, the strange procession marking a clear line between his old life and whatever came next. The land changed as they traveled north. The dusty flats around Clearwater gave way to rolling hills covered in sage and grama grass. The sky seemed to open up, a vast, unbroken bowl of blue. The scale of everything felt different, larger. Josephine Whitmore did not speak to him from the carriage window. She seemed content to read a small book, occasionally looking out at the passing landscape with a proprietary air. This was her country. They arrived as the sun was setting, casting long, purple shadows from the peaks of the Bighorn Mountains to the east. The ranch was not just a house and a barn. It was a small, self-contained settlement nestled in a wide, watered valley. A long, low ranch house built of riverstone and dark timber sat on a slight rise, its porch lights already glowing a welcoming yellow. Below it were two massive barns, a blacksmith shop with a cold forge, a bunkhouse, and a web of corrals and holding pens. Everything was orderly, well-maintained, and built to last. It was not just a place of work. It was an empire in miniature. A man came out from the largest barn as they approached. He was thick-set, with a florid face and a swagger that marked him as someone used to giving orders. He wiped his hands on a rag as he watched them arrive, his eyes lingering on Eli and Ranger. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat as Josephine stepped down from the carriage. "Wasn't expecting you back so soon." "My business concluded faster than I anticipated, Silas," she said. Her tone was polite but cool. "This is Eli Marsh. He'll be working with us for a time. This is his horse, Ranger. Put him in the end stall of the main barn, the one with the high walls. He needs his space." The foreman, Silas Croft, looked Eli up and down. It was a quick, dismissive appraisal. He saw a young hand in worn clothes, nothing more. "Another mouth to feed," he muttered, just loud enough for Eli to hear. Then, louder, "Right this way, Marsh." Eli followed him, leading Ranger. The barn was immense, clean, and smelled of fresh hay and liniment. Silas pointed to the stall. "Heard you were camped out at Abernathy's for weeks. Must be some horse if it took that long to unload him." There was a sneer in his voice. "He's particular," Eli said, uncinching the saddle. "Right," Silas grunted. "Bunkhouse is over there. Supper's at 7. Don't be late." He turned and walked away without another word, a man marking his territory. Eli took his time settling Ranger, rubbing him down, making sure he had fresh water and hay. The horse seemed calm, intrigued by the new sounds and smells. In this place of quiet order, some of the wildness seemed to have settled out of him. Or maybe it was just the lingering effect of Josephine Whitmore's touch. Over the next week, Eli found the rhythm of the ranch. He was a good hand, and he fell into the work easily. He mended fences on the vast northern range, helped with the branding of late calves, and repaired harnesses in the evening. He was quiet and kept to himself, eating his meals with the other hands in the cookhouse but speaking little. He was an observer by nature, a habit learned from his quiet father. And he observed Josephine Whitmore. She was not a distant owner who ran her affairs from the comfort of a parlor. She was everywhere. He would see her in the early morning light, walking the fence line of the horse pasture, her long coat dusted with dew. He saw her in the barns, speaking with the hands about the health of a new foal, her knowledge as practical and deep as any man's. He saw her in the evenings, a solitary light burning in the office of the main house long after the rest of the ranch was dark. She had built this place, He learned from one of the older hands, a man named Charlie, that her husband had died 5 years prior, leaving her with a modest homestead and a mountain of debt. She had not sold it. She had expanded it, buying out struggling neighbors, making shrewd deals for cattle, and transforming it into the most prosperous ranch in the county. She had done it alone. His respect for her, already seeded by the encounter at the trading post, grew into a quiet awe. She was as strong and enduring as the mountains that framed her valley. But she was also busy. Too busy, perhaps, to see everything. The discrepancy revealed itself by accident. Near the end of his first week, Josephine had asked him to fetch a new branding iron from the storeroom behind the ranch office. The door was ajar, and as he passed, he saw the ledger book lying open on the desk. A lamp was lit, illuminating a page of neat columns and figures. It was Silas Croft's handwriting. Eli had seen it on the daily work assignments posted in the barn. He only glanced at it for a second, but something caught his eye. A shipment of feed from Cheyenne. He knew the price of oats and barley almost to the penny. He'd been haggling over them with Mr. Abernathy for weeks. The price listed in the ledger was high, a full 10% higher than the going rate. It was a small thing, easily dismissed as a price fluctuation or a special order. But Eli had a mind for numbers. His father had taught him how to keep their own modest books, how to track every dollar spent and earned. It was the only way a small operation could survive. He could not shake the feeling that the number was wrong. Later that day, he was in the blacksmith shop, sharpening a set of mower blades. The smith, a grizzled man named Peterson, was complaining about a delayed shipment of coal. Croft was supposed to order it from the same supplier we get the bar stock from in Casper, Peterson grumbled, hammering a glowing piece of iron. Said the price was too high this month. Had to find a new man. Everything's late now. Eli paused, the file still in his hand. Did he say how high? Didn't say. Just that, Mrs. Whitmore wouldn't like the expense. An alarm bell went off in Eli's mind. A foreman padding an expense on feed was one thing. A foreman claiming a price was too high, while likely skimming from another account was something else entirely. It suggested a pattern. A quiet, systematic theft that relied on the owner being too occupied with larger matters to notice the small leaks. For 2 days, Eli said nothing. He did his work, his mind churning. It was not his place. He was a temporary hand, here for a month. To make such an accusation against the foreman, a man who clearly had misses, Whitmore's trust, was a monumental risk. Silas could deny it, make Eli look like a troublemaker, and have him thrown off the ranch. He would lose his wages, and worse, he would be branded a liar. But then he would see Josephine, her face etched with fatigue at the end of a long day, the lamplight in her office burning late into the night. He saw a woman of immense capability and honor being betrayed by a man she trusted. The injustice of it settled in his gut like a cold stone. His father had raised him with a simple code. You do not stand by while someone is being cheated. You speak the truth, even if it costs you. Telling her the truth would cost him Silas Croft's goodwill, a thing he had never had and did not want. But not telling her would cost him something more valuable, his own self-respect. He had made his decision. He waited until the ranch was quiet. The bunkhouse was filled with the sounds of sleeping men, and the only light came from the moon and the single glowing window of the ranch office. He walked across the yard, his boots making soft sounds in the dust. He felt like a man walking toward a cliff's edge in the dark. He knocked on the office door frame. It was a soft, hesitant sound. Come in. Her voice was tired. He stepped inside. She was at her desk, a sea of papers spread before her. She looked up, and her expression softened slightly when she saw him. In the quiet moments of the past week, a silent understanding had begun to form between them. They were both people who found comfort in work, who spoke more through action than words. Eli, she said. Is something wrong? I don't know, ma'am, he began, holding his hat in both hands. It might be nothing, but I saw something in the ledger the other day, and I heard something from Peterson, and, well, it doesn't sit right. She leaned back in her chair, giving him her full attention. She did not dismiss him. She waited. He told her what he had seen and what he had heard. He spoke plainly, without accusation, simply laying out the facts as he knew them. The price of the oats, the conversation about the coal shipment. He explained that on their own small plot, a 10% discrepancy was the difference between a profit and a loss. On a scale this large, it would amount to hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars over time. As he spoke, he watched her face. She did not show surprise or anger. Instead, a profound stillness came over her, a cold, hard clarity that was more frightening than any outburst. She had trusted Silas Croft for years. The man had worked for her husband, but she was also a woman who had built an empire on shrewdness and an unflinching assessment of reality. When the facts were laid before her, she saw the truth of them instantly. She looked down at the ledger on her desk, then at another one from a shelf behind her. She flipped through the pages for a minute, her finger tracing lines of numbers. The silence in the room was absolute. Finally, she looked up at him. The weariness was gone from her eyes, replaced by a glint of steel. You said you weren't sure if something was wrong, she said, her voice low and even. Something is wrong, Mr. Marsh. Very wrong. She closed the ledger with a soft, final thud. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. You have a good eye and an honest tongue. Those are rare qualities. He had walked into the office a temporary ranch hand. In that moment, he became something more. He had earned her trust, a thing far more valuable and far more dangerous than the foreman's goodwill. The next morning, the confrontation happened. Eli was not present for it, but the entire ranch felt the tremor. Josephine summoned Silas Croft to her office just after sunrise. The door was closed. The hands in the yard pretended to work, their ears straining. No shouting was heard, only the low, steady murmur of Mrs. Whitmore's voice and then a single sharp retort from Croft. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Silas Croft stormed out, his face a mask of purple fury. He saw Eli by the corral, and his eyes narrowed with pure hatred. You, he snarled, pointing a trembling finger. You'll regret this, boy. A man doesn't forget. Eli met his gaze and said nothing. There was nothing to say. Josephine appeared in the doorway behind Croft. She stood with her arms crossed, calm and immovable. Your things will be packed and brought to the road, Silas. Your final pay is on the desk. I suggest you take it and leave the valley before I decide to involve the sheriff. Croft spat on the ground, gave Eli one last venomous look, and stalked toward the bunkhouse. An hour later, he was gone, a sullen figure riding a lone horse down the same road Eli had traveled up a week before. A strange quiet fell over the ranch. The source of a low-grade poison had been removed, and the air felt cleaner. The hands worked with a new lightness, their respect for their employer cemented. She was fair, but she was not to be trifled with. That evening, after supper, she found Eli by the corral where he was checking on Ranger. The copper chestnut nudged his shoulder, content. The foreman's job is open, she said, stopping a few feet away. She wasn't looking at him, but at the mountains, now turning pink in the twilight. I'm not a foreman, ma'am, Eli said quietly. I'm a farmer. I only came for a month. The month is nearly up, she acknowledged. The banknote in Cheyenne has been paid. I sent a wire this afternoon. Your land is safe. A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees washed over Eli. It was done. His father's legacy was secure. He should have felt joy, a desire to go home. Instead, he felt a strange and hollow ache at the thought of leaving this valley, of leaving her. Thank you, ma'am, he said. I'm in your debt. "No," she said, finally turning to look at him. The fading light was soft on her face, showing the fine lines around her eyes. "I am in yours." A pause stretched between them, filled with the chirp of crickets and the soft sigh of the wind. "When I came to Clearwater, I was looking for a specific kind of horse, one that was loyal and steady, even if it was difficult for others to understand." She took a step closer. "I found the horse," she said softly, "but I also found a man with the same qualities." Eli's heart was hammering against his ribs. He could not read the expression in her eyes. He cleared his throat. "I should be getting back to my land. There's work to be done before winter." It was the practical thing to say, the right thing to say, but the words felt like lies in his mouth. She did not argue. She simply held his gaze. "I had hoped," she said, her voice barely a whisper, a brave and terrifying admission, "that you would find a reason to stay." There it was. Not an order, not a job offer, but a quiet, vulnerable hope laid bare between them. It was his turn to be brave. All the unspoken observations of the past weeks, the quiet respect, the growing admiration, coalesced into a single, clear certainty. This was not just a ranch he admired, but a woman he could not bear to leave. He was not the slow, unaware boy he had been. This place and this woman had awakened him. He took the final step that closed the distance between them. He reached out, not for her hand, but to gently take the worn brim of his own hat, which he held twisted in his fingers. "Josephine," he said, using her name for the first time. "It felt right. My father's land is safe because of you. It will be there. But my home, I think my home is here." He looked into her clear, gray eyes. "I would like to stay, as your foreman, and if, in time, you'd have me, I would like to stay as your husband." It was a plain-spoken declaration, all he had to offer. But it was the truest thing he had ever said. A slow, brilliant smile spread across her face, transforming her. The capable rancher, the shrewd businesswoman, disappeared, and in her place was just a woman, hopeful and radiant. "Eli Marsh," she said, a hint of laughter in her voice. "It took you long enough." Their courtship was as practical and steady as they were. There were no grand gestures, only the quiet building of a life together. It was in the shared meals at the big table in the ranch house, the long silences no longer awkward but comfortable. It was in Sunday rides up into the high pastures, not speaking for miles, simply content to be in each other's presence. It was in the way he took over the ledgers and the way she began to ask his opinion on land purchases and cattle futures, not as an employer to a foreman, but as a partner. They were married 3 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon under the giant cottonwood tree by the creek. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, and Eli wore his only suit, freshly pressed. The hands from the ranch stood as their witnesses. The ceremony was short, officiated by a traveling preacher, but the vows they exchanged were as solid and enduring as the stone of the house that stood behind them. It was not the culmination of a whirlwind romance, but the formal recognition of a bond that had been forged in trust and quiet understanding. 5 years passed. The light of a late summer evening slanted across the porch of the ranch house. Eli sat in a sturdy wooden chair he had built himself, his boots propped up on the railing. He was broader in the shoulders now, the last vestiges of the lean, worried boy from the trading post, replaced by the settled confidence of a man who knew his place in the world. Josephine sat beside him, her hand resting on his arm. The silver in her hair had spread, but her face was softer, the lines of worry replaced by lines of laughter. The ranch had prospered under their joint guidance, but that was not the measure of their success. The screen door creaked open, and a small boy of 4, with Eli's dark hair and his mother's steady gray eyes, ran out onto the porch. He was chasing a little girl, 2 years younger, whose hair was the color of dark honey, just like her mother's had been. "Papa, Thomas took my doll," the girl cried, half laughing. "Did not?" the boy shouted, holding the small rag doll just out of her reach. Eli reached out and snagged his son by the back of his shirt. "Thomas," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble, "give your sister her doll." The boy pouted but handed it over. Josephine pulled her daughter onto her lap, murmuring something that made the little girl giggle. Eli watched his family, a feeling of profound peace settling over him. He looked out across the valley, at the fields of hay ready for cutting, and the herd of cattle grazing peacefully by the creek. In the horse pasture near the barn, a flash of red caught his eye. Ranger, now gray around the muzzle but still proud, was watching them, his head held high. Josephine followed his gaze. "He's still a difficult old thing, isn't he?" she said fondly. Eli smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. "Yes, he is," he said. "But a difficult horse brought me exactly where I needed to be." She leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand warm in his. "It brought me what I needed, too." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. The children's laughter faded as they grew tired, their small bodies leaning against their parents. The world was quiet, held in the perfect, settled peace of a life built not on grand passion, but on the steady, enduring bedrock of shared work, mutual respect, and a love as quiet and as vast as the Wyoming sky. That, Eli knew, was the most valuable thing of all.